Hey everyone, welcome to Colorful Profiles Lesson 2. We explore these amazing short stories of remarkable people that are usually part of the footnotes of Jewish history, but truly amazing. In last week's lesson, anyone remember who we spoke about? Avraham ben Avraham, Avadia the convert, and Onkelos. Onkelos, that's going in reverse order. Remarkable figures that came from outside the Jewish community and left a very big impact on the Jewish communities that they joined. In this week, we'll be exploring the reverse. Jews from the Jewish community that had a remarkable influence on non-Jewish communities that were in their vicinity. So in text 1 on page 49, we have the prophecy from Isaiah. Isaiah begins a prophecy, which is really God's voice, right? The prophet is saying what God is saying. And God first dramatically introduces himself. He says, Koyamar ha'el Hashem b'irei hashamayim v'neiteyim. So said God Almighty, who created the heavens and stretched them out. Roika ha'aretz v'tzetzoel. Spread out the earth with all that springs from it. Neisin neshama la'amala v'ruach la'hilchim ba. And gave his soul to its people and life to those who walk on it. So after God introduces himself, says, hey, I'm the creator of the heavens and the earth, and I brought life. Oh, that's pretty amazing. What do you want to tell the Jewish people? God, what do you want to say to the Jewish people? And this is his message. Ani Hashem keresicha v'tzedek v'achzik biyadecha. I, God, have called you with righteousness. I will strengthen your hand. The etzrecha, the etnecha, levrisam, la'ar goyim. I will protect you and I will set you as a covenant for all people and a light onto the nations. Okay? This is the message God is telling the Jewish people. I want you to be a light onto the nations. So, let's do the exercise 2.1 on page 50. List several Jewish individuals whom you consider to have fulfilled the Jewish destiny of serving as a light onto the nations.
Rashi.
Well, these Rashi was more light onto the Jewish people.
Oh,
We don't really see necessarily that he had a big influence
okay.
in the non-Jewish world. Okay, anyone from the online audience, you could unmute to share what comes to mind when you think of a Jewish person that had influence on the non-Jewish world.
Albert Einstein.
Hold on, let me rate the volume a little bit. I'm not sure. Okay, say again, Bruce.
Albert Einstein.
Albert Einstein, yeah, he's famous. Who else? Everyone's so quiet. Wow.
Benjamin Netanyahu.
Bibi Netanyahu. Okay, yeah. Who? The Rosenberg, the Rosenberg, the bomb?
The atom bomb.
Oh, the atom bombs?
Yeah, the Rosenbergs.
Okay.
The Rabbi.
The Rabbi. Now, a lot of people, they think of Dr. Salks, who invented the polio vaccine, right? Or they say, you know, the Google co-founders, or maybe Mark Zuckerberg, you know, Facebook, the one who invented gunpowder and fertilizer. You know, when you think of that brought the one who invented gunpowder, I don't remember his name, but he brought millions of people out of starvation with his discovery on the ingredients necessary for a good fertilizer. But the truth is, a lot of these characters, not necessarily was their influence based on a Jewish light, right? They were just brilliant minds, you know, and we know that a Jewish brilliant mind can be used for good, which is wonderful, but can also be used not so good. You know, the same way we don't like to be judged by a businessman who might have been involved in a Ponzi scheme, even though he's famously Jewish, or a fellow who was very instrumental in the founding wisdom of communism, right? But it wasn't their Jewish teachings that led them to their influence. And the same thing would be in reverse. Same thing, Albert Einstein or other such individuals, they were influencers, but it wasn't not necessarily was a tie to their Jewish identity. So what do we mean when we say Jewish influencers or be a light unto the nation? It's like what we have in text 2, Reb David Kimchi. He's a commentary on the words of the prophets. He writes, the Jewish people are destined to be a light unto the nations. As the verse states, nations will go by your light and kings by the brightness of your radiance. This refers to the lights of the Torah, which will issue forth to the nations from Zion. The Jewish people will sustain the nations of the world through guiding them to observe the 7 Noahide laws and to walk in the proper path. As the verse states, multitudes of nations will go to each other and tell one another, come, let us ascend to the mountain of God, to the temple of God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his path. For the Torah will issue forth from Zion, the word of God from Jerusalem. So when the Torah says, I want the Jewish people to be Jewish influencers on the world, it's talking about that special mission of carrying that torch from Sinai and not converting others to Judaism, but making accessible to them that there is a framework for how to live a good life, a meaningful life in this world, following the 7 Noahide laws. And so famous individuals involved in that is Maimonides, had a large non-Jewish following. The Rabbi was very involved in many non-Jewish people. Rabbi Sachs, Zechariah Levracha, from England, was very influential in using the light of Torah to uplift not just the Jewish people, but many, many people. And today we're going to look at 3 individuals that most people don't know about, but everyone should know about them, okay? And the first character we're going to learn about is Rabbi Shmuel HaNagid. Rabbi Shmuel HaNagid. If you've heard of Rabbi Shmuel HaNagid, raise your hand. No, blank stares. Rabbi Shmuel HaNagid is the most incredible story, as you will see. Unbelievable story of Rabbi Shmuel HaNagid. So let's start with his birth. This takes us to the Arabian Peninsula. Spain and Portugal are in the Arabian Peninsula. And at that time, this was in the 900s. At that time, Jews were living in Spain for hundreds of years, but they weren't a serious community. Where was the serious community of the Jewish people for the past few hundred years? It was either in Israel or in Babylon. That's where the serious Jewish communities were. But for reasons that we'll explore in lesson 4, the center of gravity of the Jewish people moved away from Babylon and Israel and started moving to other countries. And suddenly, the Jews in the Arabian Peninsula start getting a little more strong and more cohesive. And a lot of that is to the credit of this fellow, Reb Shmuel HaNagid. So if you look into the map that you can see at the top of your screen, or on figure 2.1 in your book on page 53, you'll see here that at that time, the Muslims controlled the bottom part of the peninsula. The Christians controlled the northern part, and the southern part is where our story takes place. And at that time, it wasn't like there was one country. There was a bunch of fiefdoms, a bunch of small kingdoms, small kings, all Muslims, but protecting different nationalities. So there were the Slavic Muslims, the Berber Muslims, all different types of Muslim ethnic groups, and they didn't really always get along. And they often fought, and there was always border shifting and alliances and breaking of the alliances and backstabbing. A lot of this was going on. But through this all, they were all agreed that Jews were second-class citizens. That was, they could all agree to that. And in some places, Jews did terrible, and some places Jews did okay. So Shmuel HaNagid is born in Cordova, Spain. In Cordova, okay? And he grows up he's a Levite, and a lot of the history that we're gonna be speaking about Shmuel HaNagid, it comes mainly from one work called Sefer HaKabbalah. Sefer HaKabbalah was a rabbi named Reb Avram Ibn David, who lived about 100 years after Shmuel HaNagid. He lived in Cordova, and so his father was a student of Shmuel HaNagid, so he had a lot of institutional knowledge of who this figure was, and he wrote a book of history, surveying all of history from the creation of first man till his time. And part of this book of history, he includes this topic of Shmuel HaNagid. We also know Shmuel HaNagid from other sources, but in the story, in the plot of his life, of where he grew up and where he went, a lot of it comes from that phenomenal work. So let's dive into that book, text 3, and let's take it from him. If we could get an online volunteer to read for us, text 3, Gail. Yeah.
Okay. One of the outstanding disciples of Rabbi Konok ben Moshe was Rabbi Shmuel Halevi the Nagid Prince, the son of Rabbi Yosef, surnamed Ibn Nagrela of the community of Cordoba. Aside from being a great Torah scholar and highly cultured person, Rabbi Shmuel was highly versed in Arabic literature and style, and was indeed competent to serve in the king's palace. Nevertheless, he maintained himself in very modest circumstances as a spice merchant until the time when war broke out in Spain. With the termination of the rule of the house of Ibn Abi Amir and the seizure of power by the Berber chiefs, the city of Cordoba dwindled and its inhabitants were compelled to flee. Rabbi Shmuel fled to Malaga, where he occupied a shop as a spice merchant. His shop happened to adjoin the courtyard of Abu la Qasim ibn al-Arif, the vizier and scribe of King Habus, the son of Maxim, the Berber king of Granada. As a result, the scribe's maidservant would ask Rabbi Shmuel to write letters for her to her master when he was away from home. When Ibn al-Arif received the letters, he was astonished at the learning they reflected. Consequently, when after some time, the scribe was given leave by King Habus to return to his home in Malaga, he asked the people of his household, "Who wrote the letters that I received from you?" They replied, "A certain Jew from the community of Cordoba, who lives next door to your courtyard, wrote them on our behalf." The scribe ordered that Rabbi Shmuel be brought to him at once. He told him, "It does not become you to spend your time in a shop. From now on, you are to stay at my side." He thus became the scribe and counselor of the counselor to the king. The counsel that Rabbi Shmuel provided was remarkable and accurate, as if one had consulted the oracle of God. Thanks to his counsel, King Habus achieved successes and became exceedingly great. Subsequently, when the scribe Ibn al-Arif took ill and felt his death approaching, King Habus paid him a visit and said to him, "What am I going to do? Who will counsel me in the wars that surround me on every side?" Ibn al-Arif replied, "I never counseled you out of my own mind, but out of the mind of this Jew, my scribe. Look after him well and let him be like a father and a guide to you. Do whatever he says, and God will help you." Accordingly, after the scribe's death, King Habus brought Rabbi Shmuel Halevi to his palace and made him scribe and counselor. Thus he entered the king's palace in the year 4780, 1020 CE.
Wow. So you have King Habus. Let's summarize. King Habus is becoming very well established in Granada. And it's a lot due to the credits of his advisor, Ibn Harif. And when Ibn al-Arif is dying, he says, what am I going to do without you? I need your advice. And Ibn al-Arif says, this is not my advice. It's really coming from a Jew that I happened to get lucky to encounter, because we have to understand that at that time, most of the commoners were illiterate, could not read and write. And when we say someone was a writer, we don't mean they were like a secretary. We mean that they were a sophisticated person, a man of culture, a man of philosophy. A scribe was like a position of wisdom, like a sage. And Ibn al-Arif said, the advice is not for me. It's all from Shmuel HaNagid. So after Ibn al-Arif passes away, King Habus of Granada appoints this Jew, this spice merchant, to become his advisor. And this was a watershed moment. Something like that had never happened in Spain, that a Muslim king should allow a Jew to hold political office. It was unbelievable. And there was a lot of palace intrigue, because some people had a lot of respect for Shmuel HaNagid and began to admire and love him. But then there was a lot of jealousy in the palace as well. And people felt, oh, that position could have been mine if not for this Jew. Why this Jew could have a position over me? And one of these advisors was once cursing out and abusing Shmuel HaNagid. The king witnessed it and told Shmuel HaNagid, I want you to cut out his tongue. 3 weeks later, the king is walking and sees that fellow with his tongue intact. So he turns to Shmuel HaNagid. He says, Shmuel, didn't I tell you to cut out his tongue? He said, I did. I cut out his evil tongue and replaced it with a good tongue. As they drove closer in the wagon, the guy ran over and started praising the saintly Reb Shmuel HaNagid, how great you are, how holy you are, how special you are. So the King Abus asked Shmuel, how did you accomplish that? He said, after you told me to cut out his tongue, I started sending him gifts. I started inviting him for dinners. I started giving him a lot of covet. And all of a sudden, his love tank was filled up, and he felt good. And he started singing my praise. So these are some of the interesting, and there's a lot of all these interesting stories. Unfortunately, many of them are not written in the English language, but stories in Shmuel HaNagid's life. Now, that's pretty incredible. With his access to the palace, he also became very wealthy, because there was a lot of opportunities that weren't available to regular Jews that he had access to. He became very wealthy, and he used that money to hire Jewish scribes to write Torah texts. At that time, Jews were very poor and very busy surviving. Who had time to study? Very few people. And so he took it upon himself to subsidize tons and tons. Handwriting scrolls were very expensive, and he subsidized tons of Torah texts, and he became the figurehead of the Jewish community politically. Whenever they had a problem, in both directions, whenever the government had to speak to the Jewish community or the community had to speak to the government, it was through the office of Shmuel HaNagid. So he was this big, the president of the Jewish community, if you would call it. And not just that, he was also the main halachic decisor. In those days, the way you made halachic decision was you opened the Talmud and you tried to figure out how to live. Now, some things were easy, but there was always these nuances, always the uncommon situations. What should I do? Should I do it like this? Should I do it like that? Like, I'll give you, something I've been thinking about this week. I read an article of a Supreme Court decision in Israel where two women went for IVF treatment, and the hospital mixed the embryos. Okay. And one woman went home, had her baby, thinking she had her baby. And then the other woman is pregnant and discovers that her baby she's carrying has a heart issue. So they start doing testing, and during the testing, they discover that the DNA is not a match, and the other woman got the baby somewhere else. Okay, so now the Supreme Court was faced with having to figure out who does this child belong to, the birthing mother or the genetic parents? And the Supreme Court ruled in Israel, they're not representing Torah, but their ruling was that the birthing parents, they have the precedent. So it's the burden is on the, that's where she was born, and that's where the baby will stay. So these these kind of issues, they show up. And now I wonder if God has an opinion about this. And of course God does, and these things are discussed in the Talmud, but the Talmud is very vast, and a regular person doesn't know where to look. And so you need a great sage who's a master in Talmud to help you decipher, okay, which opinions do we follow, and which cases are similar to which cases. There's an art and a skill. And so he spent a lot of his time clarifying the code, and he wrote one of the first halachic codes, which is a way to make the rulings of the Talmud very digestible. And so for someone to be in such high power in office and at the same time running his businesses, we have receipts of him sending oil to the Holy Land for Jews in their synagogues to use olive oil from his orchard to have light, while he's running the Jewish community, while he's writing his halachic works. Unbelievable personality, but it doesn't stop there. His life gets even more interesting. Eventually, King Habus dies. And when King Habus dies, it usually gets very tricky when there's two sons. And he had two sons. One son's name was Badis, and the other one was Bulagin. Now, Badis and Bulagin had divided support. Bulagin had the support of the elites, and Badis had the support of the population. And now Shmuel Hanagid was forced to pick a side. And we're going to skip through the drama, but there was actually killings and revenge and all these things. But Shmuel Hanagid chose against the elites. All his friends chose Bulagin, and he chose Badis, and ultimately Badis became successful. And Badis was so appreciative that he appointed him even a higher rank. But since the country was so vulnerable, a lot of the neighboring countries that had alliances with Granada started using the opportunity to attack. And so King Badis said, I need someone to run my army. Shmuel Hanagid, you will run my army. Okay? So imagine if the President of the United States asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe to fight in combat. It's a crazy concept. And what we have here is, after he passed away, he spent over the next 12 years, he spent a few months every single year away from home, engaged in battle, and he was captured, and he was survived. He almost died. A very difficult, crazy, tumultuous years for him. And during this time, he wrote his magnum opus, a halachic work called Hilchata Gabarta. And when he passed away, his son, Yosef Hanagid, took his position in the palace as well as in leading the Jewish community. So what we're going to do is we're going to read text 5, which is the poem that Shmuel Hanagid wrote in the opening of his halachic work. And we're going to also read the description his son, Rabbi Yosef Hanagid, wrote a description of for what occasion this poem was written. So we're going to read text 5 on page 61. Jillian, do you want to read for us? Page 61.
Sure. Rabbi Yehosef Hanagid, a disastrous war erupted in the month of Iyar of the year 4809, April-May 1049. The disaster unfolded when the inhabitants of Malaga betrayed our forces in the mountains on a Thursday that was the last day of the month of Iyar, May 10th. As a result, mighty officers were killed in the battle, and my father, may the exalted God bring him honor, was captured. God saved him in a remarkable and unprecedented manner. After his rescue, he made a vow to collect and compose Hilchata Gibarada, a comprehensive compendium of Jewish laws. To introduce this work, he penned the following poem, which describes the war and his deliverance. God has enabled me to expound on the Torah and mitzvot and blessed me with the ability to issue rulings. Listen to me, therefore, you virtuous people, and hear the Torah explained virtuously. I inquire into God's rules as best as I can, as far as my mind can probe. I point out the common errors to avert them and write down the proper laws to establish them. I inscribe that which is beyond dispute articulately and with clarity. I exhume every straight matter that had lain buried, and I lead every distorted matter to its grave. God, protect the door of my lips and mouth from expressing foreign and misguided notions. Be with my words to help me, just as you assist me in my misfortune, just as you recently delivered me into the hands of oppressors, and they decreed death on me. Nevertheless, you showed great mercy to me while I was captured on the day of my calamity. You delivered me into their hands, but you were my mighty tower, my secure fortress. They seized me with their hands, but I was riding upon the precious clouds. They rushed to kill me with arrows like fiery flames, with spears like strong beams. They thought they could kill me with these weapons, but behold, their hands were tied behind their backs. The bands of my enemies were shamed, and my allies sang praise to the God of the universe. Therefore, on my lips, all my days and nights will be songs for the mighty God. Who can say that the dead will not be resurrected? I am a dead man brought up from the grave.
So, every Jew deserves to know about Shmuel Hanagid, and you say, okay, that's powerful. And if you look on page 63, we actually have a fragment that was found in the Cairo Geniza. Remember last lesson we spoke about the Ibn Ezra synagogue in Egypt, that they found all these documents where we found the music sheets from Avadia. Well, one of the fragments they found there was from this halachic work of Hilchata Gabirta from Shmuel Hanagid in his own handwriting. Truly remarkable. Now, text 6 is a Muslim poet and philosopher extolling the praises of Shmuel Hanagid. So let's read. Gilda, you want to read for us text 6? Yeah, out loud, so the Zoom crowd can hear. Yeah.
Those who count Moses among them and enjoy his light, say what you want about them, but you will not arrive at 1/10 of their qualities. How many visible marvels on earth they have accomplished, and how many generous gifts they have continuously given to the people. You, Rabbi Shmuel Hanagid, are superior to the noble men of the Orient and the Occident, just as gold is superior to copper in importance. If people could distinguish between doom and the right way, they would only have to kiss your 10 fingers. Thanks to you, I have won this world, and I have satisfied my wishes. And thanks to you, I long to meet the same game in the other world. I profess openly the religion which prescribes observance of Saturday when I stand before you, And when I am among my compatriots, I believe in that religion secretly.
So Al Munfatil, when he's praising Shmuel Hanagid, what is he praising him? That he's a good businessman, that he made a lot of money? No, that he's living a Torah truth, that he's living in the light of Hashem, that he keeps the Shabbos. This is what truly impressed him. Now, to be fair, did all Muslims suddenly start loving Jews? Unfortunately, the way we know about Al Munfatil's praise of Shmuel Hanakid is actually because it's quoted in Ibn Bassam's work, where he's blasting Al Munfatil for praising a Jewish person. How dare you praise a Jewish person? And that's how we know about this praise of Shmuel Hanakid. But what this shows us is that a Jew has to be proud of who he is. And when a Jew is proud of bringing the light of Torah, it inspires other people not to become Jewish, but to live up for what they're meant to be, to find their godly spark within, to live wholesome lives, pure lives. There was a businessman named David Chase. He lived in passed away a few years ago, and he loved the Rebbe. He loved the Rebbe, but he wasn't raised traditional. He didn't keep a lot of Torah mitzvahs. And one day the Rebbe said, "I know you're not supposed to ask for birthday presents, but can I ask you for a birthday present for my upcoming birthday?" So he said, "Sure." So the Rebbe gave him a pair of tefillin. He said, "Would you put this on every day?" So he said, "I will." He said, one day he was on his yacht, and he was very wealthy. And the captain of the ship, every day, he used to ask him, which way is east? You know, he's always trying to find Jerusalem, to pray to Jerusalem. So the captain, after a few days, said, "Why do you keep on asking me which way is east?" So he explained. And the captain said, "Wow." A few years later, he met the captain. David met the captain. The captain said, "You should know that incident changed my whole life. When I saw that you're devoted to praying to Hashem, that inspired me to become more devoted to my search for Hashem, to get married, to settle down, to build a family." And so that's a way that a Jew can make a big impact, is just by being Jewish and being comfortable in our Judaism and living an ethical life and a good life. And that's what we see from Shmuel Hanagid. With that, so let's just do a brief overview. Shmuel Hanagid was born during the Jewish Golden Era in Spain. He worked as a humble spice merchant. His talents were discovered by the king's vizier. He was appointed scribe and counselor to the king of Granada. Appointed as Nagid, which is like prince or Nasi, to the Jewish community of Granada. Supported King Badis and became his military commander. His life was saved, and he wrote Hilchata Gibarata. Okay. And so a model for those who aspire to excellence in both religious and secular worlds without sacrificing anything except his personal comforts. I'm sure he sacrificed. Okay, now we're ready to fast forward about 400 years to Italy, not too far away. And in Italy, we get to our next character. I changed the order of the lesson. We're going to head to page 76. Okay, in page 76, we get to a Rabbi Avadia Sforno. Was he related to the other Avadia? I don't think so. Okay, what do we know about Avadia? In his youth, Avadia grew up in we presume that his ancestors fled the pogroms in Spain in 1391. Well, already then Spain was a Christian country. There was pogroms, and some families ran away to Italy. And so that's where Sforno's ancestors come from. And he grew up in Cesena in northern Italy in 1475, approximately. And at the young age of like 16 or 17, he receives a doctorate in Ferrara, Italy. Okay? And this Rabbi Avadia is not just a brilliant Torah scholar, but he's also a master in the arts of philosophy and in science, very well-rounded, while staying true to his Torah Judaism. At that time, northern Italy was part of the the Holy Roman Empire. So the whole Central Europe was controlled by the Holy Roman Empire. And Sepharno, growing up in a Jewish education, learning from his father and the Jewish institutions, but at the same time going to university and getting a doctorate and becoming well-versed, he becomes a bridge between the Jewish traditions and to the Christian world. The Christians at that time were devoting a lot of time into studying the Hebrew Bible. And it's at this point, and Sepharno wrote what he's famous in the Jewish community for is a commentary on the Chumash, on the Bible, that we call Sepharno. That's what everyone knows it as, Sepharno. People know Sepharno commentary, they might not even know that his name was Rabbi Avadia, right? That's how synonymous Sepharnos come. And, you know, in the age of the printing press, you know, a Hebrew text of the Chumash was nice, very important, but it became like a commodity. So how would you upsell the Chumash? You would put in commentaries, and you put in Rashi, and then you would add Ramban, and then you'd add another commentary. And the model edition that everyone was running after was one printer. He put in 11 commentaries on the Chumash. He called it Mikrot Gedolot, the large scripture. And it had so many commentaries and made it very easy to research all the different ways of understanding a verse in the Torah. And in that list was Sepharno. And so his commentary is still studied today by any serious Torah scholar, by any yeshiva bacher. Anyone who's studying Chumash, he opens it up. He wants to see what the different commentaries say. One of the commentaries he's studying is Sepharno. He was a prominent Jewish figure in Rome, and after war in Rome, he moved to Bologna, Italy. Okay, so let's look a little bit about his commentary. His commentary is unique, is that he aims to explain the simple meaning of the Torah, the logical reasons for its mitzvot, and highlights the text's moral lessons. So this text it wasn't a commentary for the academic. It was a commentary for the thirsting Jew. Said, I just want to understand. I just want to be shown away. And so it made Judaism full color, this commentary, a brilliant, brilliant commentary. And it was written in a style that was very understandable to the lay person. If you go to Bologna, Italy today, the house of the family of Rabbi Avadia is still present. It's one of the big destination sites of tourists to the Jewish ghetto, is his house from there. Now, where do we see his big Jewish influence? Where do we see his influence on the nations of the world? So to see his influence on those around him, we're going to zoom into one specific non-Jewish fellow named Reichlin. Okay, what was Reichlin's first name? I don't remember. We'll find it soon. Okay, and anyone heard of Reichlin? Anyone heard of him before? Okay, so Reichlin is a Christian and also a thinker, a philosopher, and he becomes fascinated with Jewish scholarship. And he says, you know what? Maybe I don't believe in Judaism, but there's no question that Jews have been preserving a tradition that's very insightful for us as Christians to learn from. And so he goes to Avadia Sepharno and he says, I want you to teach me Hebrew, I want you to teach me Chumash in Hebrew, and I want you to teach me Kabbalah. And over the next few months, Avadia teaches him the Chumash, the Hebrew, does not teach him Kabbalah, but teaches him Jewish philosophy. And Reichlin goes on to write the first Hebrew-Latin dictionary based on the grammar of Reb David Kimchi. We read one of his commentaries on A Light Unto the Nations earlier in the lesson, and he develops this whole way of that Christians have to know Hebrew if they want to know whether Jesus had a father or not. You know, you have to know the Hebrew text to really know which things are nonsense and which things are real. And he learns a lot. And if you take a look at figure 2.3, you can see the borders of the Holy Roman Empire in the 16th century. So you see, these are, you have northern Italy, you have modern day Austria, and Germany, Netherlands, all these areas that are part, at that time, Holy Roman Empire. Now, a lot of Jews at that time had nowhere else in Europe to live. There was almost no other safe haven in Europe to live except for the Holy Roman Empire. Did it feel, were they treated well in the Holy Roman Empire? Of course not. And this story that we're going to look at, one interesting story is the book ban. So let's go to text 13, and we're going to read about the book ban that took place in the Holy Roman Empire in the year 1509. So remember, this is about 9 years or 8 years after Sforno graduated, received his doctorate from university. So let's get a volunteer to read us text 13 on page 79. Sophie, read out loud.
An unprecedented attack on Judaism began in earnest in 1509. The goal of the 1509 persecution was to weaken and break the surviving Jewish communities in one comprehensive effort by confiscating and destroying every Jewish book except the Hebrew Bible, thereby making it impossible to practice the religion properly. The aggressive strategy, carefully formulated to be compatible with imperial law, was initially spearheaded by Johannes Pfefferkorn, a recent convert to Christianity. Implementation of the new policy began in September of 1509 in Frankfurt am Main, home to one of the 3 most prominent Jewish communities in Germany. The other 2 being Worms and Regensburg. Despite strong resistance from Jewish leaders, a complete confiscation in Frankfurt was carried on by April 1510, and other Rhineland communities, including Worms, also suffered confiscations in 1509 and 1510.
Okay, so what happened here? Let's take a moment to explore. If anyone has come along a text of, look at what the Jews say about Christianity in their Talmud and how evil Jews are because of the Talmud, people think, oh, these are new discoveries by anti-Semites. Actually, a lot of these discoveries are coming from one book, a book written by Johannes Pfefferkorn. Who was Johannes Pfefferkorn? Johannes was born Yosef. He was a Jewish person, was born he was a petty criminal. And when he was caught, to save his skin, he converted to Christianity. And then he was a nobody. So to make a name for himself, he says, I know the Talmud, and I'm going to tell you about all the bad things in the Talmud it says about your religion. And he was he was very ignorant. He really did not know how to study Talmud. And who was his main debater? Was this Christian fellow who wasn't a great lover of Jews, named Johann Reuchlin. Johann Reuchlin, the Christian, goes on to completely destroy Pfefferkorn and show him that he doesn't understand his own, he didn't learn anything in yeshiva as a kid, and he really doesn't understand, like his things make no sense. But those that hate Jews, love to have ammunition and excuses to hate Jews. But what comes so amazing is that based on these slanders of Pfefferkorn, a lot of people said, okay, we have to get rid of the Jews. And the best way to get rid of the Jews is it was illegal to get rid of the Jews. You couldn't do a genocide against Jews in those times, but we'll get rid of their books. Except for the Bible, we're getting rid of all their books. Now, this wasn't the first time it wasn't the first time in Europe. In fact, in France, they successfully destroyed wagons full of the Talmud, which led to almost the complete destruction of the French Jewish community at that time. So this was 200-300 years later, 400 years later, they're following the same tactic to destroy the Jewish community. They collect all the books in Frankfurt and other Jewish population centers. And let's read text 14. Stan, text 14. On page 80.
Yeah, I have to unmute. Okay, the emperor issued a new mandate on the 6th of July, 1510, that required legal and theological evaluations of the confiscation policy from 4 universities and 3 individual scholars, including Rauchlin. While all the other experts submitted enthusiastic endorsements for implementing the new policy, to everyone's astonishment, Rauchlin argued against Maximilian's tactic, forcefully contending that the book confiscation did not accord with imperial law and was not justified on religious or theological grounds. He carefully elaborated this defense in an extensive legal analysis he sent to the emperor in October of 1510 and then published in 1511. Although his conclusions stood alone among the 7 evaluations, Rauchlin's defense was so powerfully argued that it effectively stymied the new and dangerously potent method of persecution. As far as we know, all the books were returned to the Jewish owners, and, despite determined efforts, the strategy was never again attempted in early modern Germany.
Okay, so it was the defense of this non-Jew, taught by Avadia Safarno Hebrew, that he says we have to save, 7 positions, 6 coming out saying we have to ban the books, 1 standing against them at great personal risk, and he was vilified by many Christians for, are you a Jew lover? You're standing up for the Jews. Are you paid off by the Mossad? Just translate whatever tropes, people say. And, but he successfully defended the Jewish people from this big book burning. And the Jews at that time, and look in text 15, Rabbi Yosselman of Rasheim, he writes about this episode. And he says, in the year of 1510, enemies and renegades referring to Pfefferkorn, rose up against our people, seeking to destroy our Torah books. God showed us a miracle within a miracle, as non-Jewish scholars countered our oppressors and returned the Torah books to their former glory. In other words, he's saying, not only did God save us, that we got our books back, but look who brought about the salvation. The non-Jewish community was the one who stood up for us, not the community, but really like one minority within the community, put his life on the line to save us. And it's all because of this relationship he had earlier in his life with Rabbi Avadia Safarno, this great prolific teacher and writer to this very day. Now, Rabbi Avadia himself, Reichlin fought against the banning of all Jewish books in the Holy Roman Empire. And Rabbi Avadia himself wrote a book called Ar Amim, which was a book of philosophy. At that time, the science of the time was very dogmatic in its view of Aristotle. And even Maimonides admired the wisdom of Aristotle. However, Aristotelian beliefs sometimes don't give room or space for beliefs that Jews have, like God is creator of heaven and earth. At a certain point in history, there is a start to history, an end to history. God is involved in creation. Certain beliefs like that Sforno wrote a masterful work of philosophy explaining how, from philosophy's own point of view, has to accept these premises as true. And Sforno himself translated this work into Latin. Okay, and we have on page 81, the title page of Lumen Gentium, Light of the Nations, where he wrote this work. And he felt that his mission, that not only is it important that Jews believe in God, but it's the 7 Noahide laws. So even a non-Jew has to believe in God. They don't have to keep the Shabbos, they don't have to keep kosher, but a belief in God is creator of heaven and earth that has a purpose for the world. That's a mitzvah for every person in the entire world to live their lives according to those values. So that's the remarkable story of Rabbi Vadia Sforno. Influenced Johann Reuchlin, the prominent supporter of Judaism in Germany, and he wrote an authoritative commentary on the Torah. With that, let us go to our third personality, which is also wow. So anyone ever heard of Rabbi Menashe ben Yisrael? Okay, don't worry. I also didn't hear about him until a few weeks ago. I actually have heard of him, but he's not one of those big, larger than life figures that you hear about until you're a history nerd, you know. And if I were to tell you what was the name of Rabbi Menashe's father, if you anyone could guess the name of Rabbi Menashe's father?
Yisrael.
Yisrael, right? That's what you would think. But in fact, the name of Menashe's father started off as Nunes Rodriguez. So let's take a look at Nunes Rodriguez. So we have to go a little bit back in time. Forward in time. We go forward in time, but back to Spain. We started in Spain. Now we're back to Spain. Okay. There was this fellow named Gaspar Rodriguez Nunes. Gaspar Rodriguez Nunes, let's give some history, okay? The Christians control Spain, and they decide that in 1392 or 1492, all Jews have to leave Spain or convert to Christianity. Okay, under Queen Isabella. And what happens? Many Jews say, well, maybe this is temporary. We'll convert outwardly, inwardly, we'll stay Jewish. We won't lose our money. We won't lose our family ties. But a few devout families, many, but not the majority, but many, a nice amount of Jews say, we'd rather stay open, committed Jews than convert, and they leave the country. Many of them are looking, where's the place to go? So they decide, you know what? We'll head north to Portugal. We'll go to the Kingdom of Portugal, and there we'll be safe to practice as Jews. But then Queen Isabella convinces King Emmanuel of Portugal, you have to force all, you can't have Jews in your country. You have to convince them to leave or convert. So King Emmanuel says, okay, Jews, you have until this day to convert or leave. He heard how many Jews converted in Spain. He thinks he'll be successful, but he miscalculates. He doesn't realize the Jews who came to his country, they're the ones who already gave up everything to stay committed to the Judaism to come to his country. So they're all getting ready to leave. And he doesn't want them to leave. He knows they're brilliant workers and hard work and bankers. He doesn't want them to leave. So what does he do? He shuts down the port. He doesn't allow the Jews to leave. And then he says, oh, you're here past the deadline. I'm converting you. And he converts them. But since he knows that they don't agree with it, they were forced into it, so he kind of goes very aggressive to kind of impose the conversion that they weren't willing to, they were willing to leave. But he doesn't allow for that option, which reminds of the joke of the Jew who the Christians force him to convert, and they sprinkle the water on him and they say, you're a Christian, you're Christian, you're Christian. And that Friday they see him cooking meat. And they said, you're not allowed to cook meat on Friday. Don't you know a Christian is not allowed to cook meat on Friday? He says, this is not meat. This is fish. Like, what are you talking about? He said, I sprinkled my water. Fish, fish, fish. You know, so in that way, you know, the Jews in the Portugal conversos were different than the Spanish conversos in this way that they were deeply committed, but they were also deeply pressured in a very intense way. Spain had its own stories, but let's take a look at one of these people who were caught, caught for secretly practicing as a Jew, which was worse than the crime of being Jewish. Being Jewish is a crime, but being a Christian who's really a Jew, that's even worse. So let's take a look at text 7. We're going back to page 66. Text 7, all about Gaspar Rodriguez Nunes. Now, we did a filtered version. We cut out the graphic material because you could lose it. It's terrible to read the actual graphic material of what they did to him. So, Felice, you want to read for us text 7? Oh, still muted. Yeah. Nice.
As Gaspar Rodriguez Nunes sat at the cell waiting for his 4th session with the Lisbon Inquisition, he was in excruciating pain. 3 previous stints on the rack and the hoist had seriously damaged his 39-year-old body. During the first round of torture on August 28, 1596, Gaspar defended his innocence. The torturer was directed to apply more pressure. After a month to reflect on his offenses and to heal somewhat, Gaspar once again was subjected to this cruel examination, despite the fact that his first torture had not been properly carried out, because the mishap which Gaspar seemed to have suffered apparently had fainted and his limbs swelled up, so the session ended prematurely. Still, he confessed nothing. On the 3rd occasion, the inquisitioners decided that hanging him by his arms tied behind his back might be a more effective technique. This time, Gaspar did indeed confess. He said that while he had been baptized as a child and lived outwardly as a Catholic for decades, he was a Jew and he believed in the law of Moses for the last 16 or 17 years. The Lisbon authorities were not satisfied with Gaspar's confessions, and it seems he had not named enough names, so yet another torture session was scheduled for early February 1597. It is almost 4 years since Gaspar's arrest, and he was a broken man, both mentally and physically. Gaspar told his examiners that his arms were in bad way and that he would not be able to withstand further torture. In the light of this, the members of the Holy Tribunal decided that this was enough. Gaspar Rodriguez Nunes, maimed in his right arm and hand, and his body covered with lesions, was released from prison on February 27th. He was ordered to appear at an auto de fe in Lisbon, where he would be reconciled with the church. He was forced to give up all his property except a form of house arrest, attend mass regularly, and wear sabanito outside the home.
Okay, so let's just explain some concepts here. This is already 100 years after the Portuguese Jews were mass converted. So he grew up in a converso family. He was baptized as a child, and yet the flame is still very strong. And he was captured. Where do we know about this torture from? We know it from the Inquisition records that are still available. We have those records, so it's coming from them. It's not coming from the inside of the Jewish community. And he was tortured, and he was brought to auto de fe. Auto de fe was like a public square where they would give your sentencing. And some Jews were burnt at the stake, famously. But he got lucky, where they just confiscated all his property, made him walk around in the San Benito, which was a red and yellow garment that would like make everyone know, stay away, this was a traitor converso. And he had to attend mass regularly. it wasn't just him, it was his whole family got caught up in it. His wife was the one that actually was tortured into spilling the beans on him. A very messy story you could spend. But eventually his wife passes away, he remarries, and he has some joy. He gives birth to a boy, names him Manuel, and Gaspar Rodriguez Nunes eventually flees Lisbon, and after a few stops, eventually makes it to Amsterdam. And Amsterdam is, anyone remember what we said last week about Amsterdam at the time? Amsterdam is a Christian country, but was very tolerant of other faith traditions. And so it is this time that Gaspar Rodriguez Nunes is able to come out openly. I'm a Jew and I'm proud. And the family name becomes Ben Yisrael. So it becomes a family name, Ben Yisrael. And they have a boy. And what do they name their boy Manuel that they brought with them? Where did they change his name to? Menashe Ben Yisrael. So this is the background of the figure that we're going to discuss for the rest of the lesson. Menashe Ben Yisrael. Now,
That's
go ahead.
That's so interesting because I was recently in Portugal and I wanted to understand more about the Judaism. I went to the shuls there and whatever. I just returned from Amsterdam. My family's Dutch, and my grandfather's name is Emmanuel Menachem, but who Alexander, my son's named after. But I always wanted to know, because we have like a serious family tree, and I always wanted to know, where do they come from? Because like you said, it was not a Jewish country. And I learned that it's from Spain in like the 1500s, 1600s. Like, it's unbelievable.
It's truly fascinating.
It really fascinating. It was such a mystery to me. So you just confirmed it all. Thank you.
Welcome. Wow. Hashkacha pratis, as they say. Really
Always synchronicity. Thank you.
So now this Menashe becomes a Rabbi Menashe. How's that? He goes to he receives a solid Jewish education studying under a Moroccan-born scholar named Rabbi Yitzchak Uziel. So Rabbi Yitzchak Uziel is from Moroccan countries where they weren't harassed as crazy as their Spanish brothers and sisters. And so now it's like a breath of fresh air. For 100 years, these Jews had to hide their Judaism, and many, the fight was too big, too hard, too difficult. They gave up the fight, but certain families stayed strong. A lot of this, most of this, we'll read next week, was due to the credit of the woman. It was the Jewish woman at the time that really kept the Jewish spark afloat. And now this Menashe is learning under him, and eventually, when the Moroccan-born rabbi passes away, who becomes the rabbi of the yeshiva? This boy, this Manuel, Reb Menashe Ben Yisrael. And he makes it his mission. He says, we have all these Jewish kids that they don't know a word of Hebrew. They're in their 15s, their 20s, their 30s, their 70s. They don't know Hebrew. They know the Bible because they hear it in a Christian school all the time, but they don't know it Hebrew. So he sets up the first Hebrew printing press, and he starts publishing books in Spanish and in Hebrew to both teach these Jews Hebrew and if you know Hebrew, you gain access to so much Jewish text. But at the same time, he knows not everyone can learn Hebrew, and he starts publishing the Chumash in Spanish in a way that's aligned with the Jewish tradition. And he's tremendously influential. One of his most famous works is a 3-volume work called El Conciliator, and in his introduction, he writes that the purpose of this book is that when you're studying the Bible, it's not like a easy read. And sometimes you have to parse together what are the meaning and how do things work together. You have God is not in an image, but God says, Moses, you could see my back and not my face, and the stretched hand of God. All these interesting puzzles in the Bible that how they work together. So he wrote this work in what language? In Latin. In Latin. And he also made a version in Spanish. And just to make it, he felt that this work is not only for the Jewish community. He writes that the purpose of this work is not just the Jews should know how to learn Chumash, but the non-Jews should also know how to learn. If they're learning Chumash, they should be learning it well. They should be learning it authentic. And so let's read from his introduction on text 8, page 68. Genya.
Oh, 68. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Jewish prestige. I conceive that my work will be acceptable to the learned. For if duly examined, we shall find that the study and lecture of the Talmud were not considered unimportant. Some of the present questions were asked by the Alexandrians of Rabbi Joshua ben Hanina, an illustrious and learned sage, as stated in the Gemara of Nida. We also learn from Berachat, Poland, and other parts that some heathen princess mooted similar doubts to the ancients, who, as disciples of the prophets, could alone interpret and solve many passages, which, from their difficulty, would otherwise have been unintelligible. No little honor will accrue from it to the Hebrew nation and the sages of Israel, as the knowledge and intelligence they possessed will be clearly seen in this work.
So he said, I'm a collector. He's not claiming to be a fountain of wisdom on his own, but he's saying, we know that even in Alexandria, where the Greeks had their big philosophers, but they went to the Jewish sages and they posed 12 questions to which the sages gave remarkable answers. And many times that the non-Jewish community could learn so much from the Jewish sages. And then he wrote this work to show his neighbors and his friends who were all not Jewish. He said, here, let me present this to you. Now, just because someone writes a book doesn't mean anyone's going to read it. But the fact is that it became very popular in its time. Many non-Jews were fascinated by it and were reading this book. Yeah, go ahead.
This is interesting because Japan was the only country during World War II that opened the doors without any passport, right? It was Japan, right? And they have a Holocaust museum there. They're also teaching their children, their students, the Torah, the Bible. That's part of their curriculum. And I'm wondering if, and the influence of design, like Delft, comes from Asia, comes from Japan. So, and China. And I'm wondering if there was a correlation there, and are they learning from his book?
I doubt that Japan is using this. It seems that their tradition comes from a different angle, not from Menashe ben Israel. But as far as I know, and also just to mention, in the end, they had to kick out the Jews from Japan once they became aligned with the Nazis. The Japanese had to ultimately, the Jews had to go to China to survive. So it wasn't like it all worked out, but many Jews survived through that route, through Russia to Japan. My wife's adopted grandfather, Rabbi Greenglass, that was his journey.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. I know him very well. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so back to our story. So we have Menashe ben Israel, and he says they've always been a source of knowledge to the world, but for a few hundred years, the Jews couldn't be a light unto the nations. Why? They were so busy worrying about, can they even be a light for themselves? Are they going to be killed, destroyed? So who has time to invest in shearing when we have to actually hide for our survival? But he says, but now we're in this golden time, and it's time for us to actually stand up for what the Jews are called on to be, a light unto the nations. And in text 9, in an introduction to a separate work that he wrote about the Jewish view on resurrection of the dead and other things, he writes, in the same way, great Lord, that in any well-governed republic, the subjects are given laws under which to live, being God, the architect and supreme creator of the universe, it must be believed infallibly that he has constituted laws for his subject creatures, because otherwise, how could the world be sustained? Or what way would there be to live amongst men if they were not governed by divine command? Thus we believe that he has given to all nations the 7 precepts, which are called the laws of the sons of Noah, who are all over the world, and these are, what are the 7 Noahide laws? Not to idolize, not to kill, not to adulterate, not to steal, not to curse in the name of God, not to eat the meat of live animals, and not to establish judges, and to establish judges who enforce these laws. Also to the children of Israel, whom he chose to his people, he further established the law of Moses contained in 613 precepts. So he's writing in this work, who the target audience and who are reading it are non-Jews. He's explaining to them, he says, how do you think laws happen? Do you think everyone just makes it up on their own? There's a system. It's just like a car inventor. There's a manual of how to operate the car. The creator of the world has an operating manual. It's the 7 Noahide laws. And actually, this message takes off. This message is accepted and takes off. Before we get there, let's summarize. So the Spanish expulsion in 1492, many fled to Portugal. The Portuguese expulsion in 5 years later, or 6 years later, in 1497, Gaspar Rodriguez Nunes, living almost 80, 90 years later, was tortured and severely punished for his heresy, fled to Amsterdam with his family. Menashe ben Israel is his son, and he's spreading Judaism's universal message via written works. He opened the printing press focused on books for ex-converso Jews. He authored a number of books, including The Conciliator. And what is he going on this campaign? He's saying there's a rule of law for everyone. And the 7 Noahide laws, he says, number 1, no idolatry. Don't get caught up with things that feel like they have power, that they really don't. They don't have any power on their own. The sun has tremendous power, but it's not its own power. It's God who's making the motions of the heavens. It's nature is a force, but it's not its own force. It's a force controlled by God. So don't worship anything. So if you see a celebrity becomes famous or powerful, it's not their own power. It's God's power. So that's number 1. Number 2, no blasphemy. You say, okay, I don't believe in gods. What happens when someone doesn't believe in gods? They usually believe in one God, themselves, right? They say, oh, there's no one can tell me what to do. I'm the only one in charge. So that's the second mitzvah. Do not curse God's name. Hold God as a power. And these are very important. Sometimes societies think we could be cultured without God. We don't need God to tell us how to live our lives. And the Nazis lived in a very cultured society. Famously, they lived very scientifically advanced and very proficient in the arts and the culture. But it didn't produce anything because they didn't believe in command number 2, that there's a higher power. No illicit relations are very important for a society to invest in and harness sexual energy for light and warmth, and not the opposite of destruction and jealousy and hurt and pain. No murder. That means life is important, life is precious. No theft, and no cruelty to animals. And 7, to create a judiciary. And part of creating a judiciary is not just, as they say, like a society dies not because of bad people, but because of good people who don't stand up to the bad people, right? So you need a judiciary to enforce these things, but it's not just in the negative, it's also in the positive. The judiciary's responsibility is to also make sure that the downtrodden are taken care of, that the society is looking out for each other. So we see here 7 mitzvahs, but it's really much bigger than that, because these are really 7 categories of that contain many details. For example, no theft includes the obligation for employers to pay their workers on time, right? Is that theft? Yeah, it's a type. If you agreed on a time, you have to pay them on time. So these include many details. And these are, so if Elon Musk is successful in establishing a society on Mars, will encourage him that his constitution should be based on this framework, not just because it's good, but as the Jews believe that God gave this. As we look at to Maimonides, do we have Maimonides here? Maimonides in text 10 on page 72. Moses delivered to us the divine command to ensure that all inhabitants of the world accept the Noahide laws. Anyone who accepts the 7 laws and observes them is considered one of the righteous among the nations and earns themselves a place in the world to come. This is contingent on acceptance of the laws because they were commanded by God in the Torah, and Moses informed us that Noah's descendants had previously been commanded to observe them. So it's very important. Their belief has to stem because it's God's law, right? A society that says we don't need God, but we won't murder, won't steal, end up blurring the lines. But Jews for hundreds of years could not embrace this calling of being a light unto the nations and sharing this message because you were killed, But at that time, Menashe ben Israel felt we're living in a golden era and people are open and we have to use this this ability. And he went on this campaign. Responsibility to promote this moral framework that comes from divine origin. Now, he was very well, he had a lot of good friends, neighbors, non-Jewish neighbors. One of his neighbors on his block was a fellow named Rembrandt. Anyone heard of Rembrandt? Yeah, the famous artist?
I was just there. It was right in the Jewish quarters.
It's in the Jewish quarters. Who
Yeah.
lived a few houses down? Menashe ben Israel. And
Wow.
Menashe ben Israel, in his, he needed some art for one of his books that he was printing. So we have up on the screen the wood etching that Rembrandt did for him.
Wow.
Right? In it, you see the scenes. It's also in the student book on page 74. In it, you see the etchings of the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel's vision of the 4 beasts, the battle of David and Goliath, and Jacob's ladders. So these are Rembrandt's art that are found in.
Yeah, it said in museum that he got a lot of his inspiration from his Jewish religious connections.
Yeah, and one of this major Jewish connection was Menashe ben Israel. But that's nice and beautiful. But actually, where he had major influence, which affected the course of history for the entire world, was his influence on several eminent Christian scholars, all of them Christian Hebraists. So let's take a look at text 11. Several eminent Christian scholars, all of them Christian Hebraists, evinced an extraordinary interest in Noahide law. Menashe was in contact with 2 such scholars, Hugo Grotius and Peter Canales, and he was undoubtedly familiar with the third, John Selden. These scholars had rediscovered, as it were, in rabbinic and Old Testament sources, an ancient model for governance, one they believed to be something resembling, if not constituting, an ancient articulation of natural law. Concanius associated Noahide law with something like natural law in his work of 1617, De Republica Hebraeum Libre 3, and Critias did the same in another work. In 1640, the Christian Hebraist John Selden published his book, an entire work that takes at its premise that Noahide law and law of nature are one and the same. Seldom cited Menashe as an authority. So these Christian Hebraists are saying we have a new paradigm. It's not just the kings or the popes that are in charge, but actually every man is created in God's image and has to work together to create a society. And they start writing all these books about how society has to be built on the 7 Noahide laws. And one of the figures in this movement was a figure named John Locke, who was a great influence to the American founding fathers. And the many American founding fathers, when they founded the country and the Constitution, was based on the principles that these Christian Hebraists developed based on their interactions with Menashe ben Yisrael. Okay? And so think about how the world changed after the American Revolution and how the whole way of history has completely changed. Now, the end of Rabbi Menashe ben Yisrael's life is also fascinating. At that time, England, already from the 1200s, banned all Jews living in England. So now we're, in the 1600s, and there's a fellow in England named Oliver Cromwell. And Oliver Cromwell is trying to liberalize England, that the kings shouldn't hold all the power. And Menashe ben Yisrael spends 2 years trying to convince Cromwell to allow the Jews entry into England. And let me find the text.
75.
Is it 75? I'm not finding it. Give me a second. 75 is where you see the text, right? But do we have a text from inside? No. Okay. He makes an argument. He makes an argument for the Jewish people to stay. He says on moral grounds, on economic grounds, a well laid out argument for the Jewish people to be allowed to stay. And then all his last surviving child passes away, and he goes back to Amsterdam to bury his son in his homeland. And on the way, he passes away as well. So he passes away as a broken man, saying that his efforts in England didn't succeed. But the truth is, his efforts did succeed, because although the law was not changed, and it hasn't been changed till this very day, Oliver Cromwell started secretly allowing the Jews to come into the country, and Jews have been in England ever since. And if he lived on another 50, 60 years, he would have witnessed the American Revolution and the Founding Fathers, and I'm sure he would have had a lot of nachas from seeing a country that tolerated Jews and had respect for all people created under God. So he influenced political thinkers such as John Locke and James Harrington, and artists such as Rembrandt, and he lobbied for readmission of the Jews to England. And Jews were readmitted to England thanks to his influence, although he never got to see that. He promoted the message of Jewish ethics and morality to non-Jews. And that's what the Torah tells us. The Torah tells us. And this is from Sepharno's text. Remember we spoke about Sepharno? See, he writes text 16 on page 83. We're jumping back ahead. You shall be to me a kingdom of priests. You will be a unique treasure to me in the sense that you will be a kingdom of priests whose mission is to guide and teach the entire human race to call upon the name of God and to serve him with one purpose. So when it says we're the chosen people, it's not that we're better than anyone else. It's that we have a special mission. And that special mission is to make sure that the entire world knows about the torch of Sinai, that knows that we're here for a purpose, we're here for a reason to make the world a better place. And now we live in that time that Jews do have the ability to be big influencers into our neighbors, to the people we work with, to the people we sit in the cab with, to any person we meet. We can, number one, be like Shmuel Hanagid, to be a model of what it means to live an ethical life. So we could have influence even without preaching. Just living an upstanding life is already making a big difference. And number two, to actually speak up, say what we're here for. The entire world is waiting to hear the message of the Jewish people, but the Jewish people are stuttering. They're afraid to say, they're like, oh, we deserve to exist because the United Nations, 1948, we're stuttering. We're not clear about who we are, what we believe in, what we stand for. And when that will happen, that will help the non-Jewish communities feel like, oh, okay, we're confused. We're waiting to hear. We're waiting to hear. What do the Jews have to say? And the Jews have been stuttering, but hopefully as Mashiach comes, gets closer to coming, we could get more comfortable in our skin. There was this fellow a couple years back, he very wealthy Orthodox Jew, and he had a business. And one day, one of his friends tell him, you know, I have a Korean family friend, and their daughter is looking for an internship. Can she get an internship in your company? So he said, sure. So a few months later, he gets a call from the ambassador of Korea to the United States, or to the United Nations, Korea to United Nations. He said, thank you so much for everything you do for my daughter. So he says, what are you talking about? It's like, you know, the internship, my daughter. It's like, oh, I didn't realize it was for the ambassador from Korea to the United Nations. Oh, beautiful. They go out for lunch. Very nice. Says, you know, my daughter, it tells me how amazing your company is, that everyone is so nice to each other and everyone looks out for each other, and that there's a minyan for mincha that you guys pray, and she finds it so amazing and so beautiful. You know, we were nervous she's going to come to the US and she's going to fall in with the wrong crowd, and like it happens to other Korean kids, and we're so happy that she found a place in your office. Okay, very nice. A few weeks later, the Korean says, do you know why I was late to that lunch? Remember, we came out to lunch, I was an hour late. It's because there was a vote happening. The United Nations was condemning Israel. And Korea has always joined the condemnations. But because of the way I see how you guys treat my daughter, and you didn't even know who my daughter was, I decided to abstain. And that was the first time that Korea abstained, was that time. And then every few months, he used to text the owner, I'm sure you're worried about the vote that's coming up. Don't worry, Korea will not support. And for the next few years, while he was ambassador, Korea abstained from all those crazy allegations. So that's just a way of living proud of who we are, has a tremendous impact and influence on others. And that's who we are. We use the religious freedoms of modernity to spread Judaism's universal ethics and morality. Number one, to ourselves by living a ethical and moral life. And number two, sharing the calling on others.
Lesson 2.
We'll get back to that video. First, we'll do this.
It started around 8 o'clock. Boomed into the night. Spectacular general. Still burning. You can still see the orange glow. There's just no way to quantify this.
Is it frozen?
On December 11th, 1995, at 8 p.m., a boiler exploded in the largest textile factory in America at the time, the Malden Mills. It burnt the entire factory to the ground. The fire was so big, it could be seen from miles away, and it took an entire week to put out the fire completely. At the time, Mr. Aaron Feuerstein, the owner, the CEO of the company, was celebrating his 70th birthday. And in the middle of the party, one of the executives ran over to him and said, Mr. Feuerstein, there's a fire at the mill. By the time he got there, the factory that had been built by his grandfather in the early 1900s was mostly gone, which meant that overnight, 3,000 employees who worked at Molten Mills lost their job. As far as Mr. Feuerstein was concerned, he was about to collect close to $500 million from the insurance company. He was faced with the following decision. Either close the company and pocket the money, or he can rebuild the company down south and hire cheaper labor over there and still make a lot of money. Either choice would have been common practice amongst CEOs at the time. Everybody expected for Mr. Feuerstein to do the same. The next morning, Mr. Feuerstein called a press conference. Thousands of people were crammed and jammed into this huge auditorium. Senators, politicians were there. And in front of everyone, he gets up and he makes this stunning announcement. He pledged to rebuild the factory right here in Massachusetts, bigger and better than ever before. And not only that, he continues and he says, every single one of you will continue receiving your monthly paychecks until it's rebuilt.
All our employees will be paid their full salaries.
The entire place erupted. There was so much emotion. It was charged because people were so anxious and nervous up to that point, thinking they lost their livelihood. And all of a sudden, the saint of a man gets up and he pledges and he promises that they have nothing to worry about. News media outlets showed the footage of him making the announcement, and they also showed people waiting online afterwards to pick up their paychecks. It made national and international headlines.
You'll receive your bonuses and everything today.
He was interviewed by dozens of news media outlets, and they asked him, they said, why would you even do that?
My father, who was a very observant Jew, taught me, and I still remember his quotation, which was, Bimkom she'ein anoshim, in those circumstances where there is a moral vacuum, hishtadel liyos ish, do everything within your power to be a man. And that's what he instructed his children to do, and that's what I'm trying to do.
The President of the United States, Bill Clinton, in 1996, invited him to the State of the Union and sat him next to the First Lady and honored him, calling him periodically afterwards to ask him for business advice, recognizing that here was a man who didn't see money as the end of it all, as the bottom line.
Some might have said the proper business decision for a 70-year-old guy is to take the $300 million in insurance and retire.
And what would I do with it? Eat more? Buy another suit? Retire and die? Huh. No, that did not go into my mind. That was not an option, not for a second.
I was only 14 years old when this happened. But recently, when I heard about it again, I wondered, is Mr. Feuerstein still alive? Can I interview him? Can I meet him? And maybe even can I get a blessing from a great man like that? I made some calls, and I found that he lives in Brookline, Massachusetts. He's alive and well. He hasn't given an interview in 25 years. He said yes. I took along my 12-year-old son, Shalom. We traveled to Boston. We came to the house of his granddaughter, Marika Feuerstein. He lives with his granddaughter, 95. Not a young man anymore, but completely healthy and completely with it. As I walked into his home and shook his hand, I can see in his eyes the wisdom, the life experience. And I was really excited to sit and talk with him. The first question I asked him, I said, Mr. Feuerstein, what gave you the courage, the strength to walk away from hundreds of millions of dollars and do what's right and treat the workers properly like human beings, take care of them?
First of all, the Torah. As a young man, when I read and studied the Torah, that showed me the way of life. That was very, very important. Lo sa shok socher, not to oppress the worker. You got a lot of workers, not to oppress the worker, because he's an oni and an evion. We considered him a human being, not a pair of hands. And there's a difference.
He said, my father was a great example. He was a big tzaddik. He also taught me to be a mensch. My
father was a tzaddik and had great influence over me. Today we see orthodoxy prospering. But when my father was a young man, orthodoxy was dying. And my father was the one who kept the Orthodox alive in Boston. The business was started by his father, Henry Feuerstein. He came over to this country in his teens, and he read in the Forward's Yiddish newspaper that there was a factory for sale in Malden. He went to see the factory. He knew nothing about knitting machinery, nothing about sweaters, nothing about anything, any product. He said, there's a place where I can go to shul, I'll be my own boss, and he bought it. And the business prospered, and by the time I got to the business, the Malden Knitting Mills was ranked AAA1 for credit, and they were worth millions.
I asked him about the employees when they returned to work at Malden Mills after it was rebuilt. They increased productivity by 40% without a wage increase, just as an expression of gratitude to Mr. Feuerstein and what he had done.
We had good employees. Many of them couldn't even speak English. But when treated like human beings, they were just terrific. They wanted me to succeed, and they increased employment without a wage increase.
Then I asked him a very difficult question. I said, Mr. Feuerstein, I know that eventually your company went bankrupt. Do you ever feel that had you not done that good deed and spent the tens of millions of dollars on the employees, paying them while the company was being rebuilt, did you ever feel like you would have had the money to continue going?
No. You have no right to defame God's name with your business or with your family, whatever your enterprise is. Lo zechalu shem kodshi v'nikdashti b'sot b'nei Yisrael. I was too enthusiastic. I should have gone slow. I wanted to go rapidly. And so I paid for it.
Something he was really proud of was the building of the Shul of Young Israel in Brookline in Massachusetts. And he kept telling me, make sure you go see the Shul. A beautiful piece of architecture.
I remember as a young man, it was a fight to get a minyan in the shul. I wanted to have a shul that was not in the basement. I thought that was a bekovedik for God. If you want him to dwell in the house, you have to make a nice house. So we put together the money and we built an Orthodox shul. And it's something that God could walk into. I feel like some of the Jews who went to the Beis Mikdash years ago, I'm in the presence of God.
I couldn't help but feel the entire conversation with Mr. Feuerstein was just an incredible experience. I was sitting in front of a giant. He didn't look to sound good or to look good. He just looked to impart the wisdom that he had gained over the years and that he had lived by. And finally, I asked him, Mr. Feuerstein, bless me, bless my son. I'm in awe of what you have done, what you have accomplished, the decisions you have made.
May God bless you and make you secure. May God see you through security intellectually, the most important. And he should give you, without all you do, the divine objective to spread Torah.
My son and I will never forget that interview, that experience. I said my goodbyes, we wrapped it up, we went back to LA. Shortly after we came back to LA, we got a call from the family. Mr. Feuerstein had passed away. I thought, if he hadn't given an interview in 25 years, why did he agree to do it now? I couldn't help but feel that Hashem sent me to Boston to do his story before he passed, so that the world could know.
I always kept in my mind that I should make it a Kiddush Hashem and not a Chillul Hashem.
Wow, that was just beautiful.
Yeah.
That's an incredible story.
And with that, I wish everyone tomorrow night is Lag BaOmer. It's a celebration of unity and Jewish spirit, and let us cherish the Lag BaOmer. And then I'll see you all next week. Or next week, we've seen so far six stories of remarkable people. But next week we're gonna learn of 3 remarkable women.
Yay.
Unbelievable stories. I mean, every lesson, every 20 minutes in this course, you're introduced to another person so special, so unique. Who did we discuss today? We discussed Shmuel Hanagid, the rabbi who was the general of Muslim armies. We discussed Avadia Seforno, who influenced non-Jews to stand with the Jewish community to save the Jewish books for the Jews in the Holy Roman Empire. And we explored the amazing story of Israel ben Menashe, who's descended from Portuguese conversos, has a major influence on his non-Jewish neighbors, and eventually, after his lifetime, leads to Jews being allowed to come back to England. Okay. Good night. Good night.
Thank you so much. This is
Good night, Rabbi. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you. It was a great lesson.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you
Rabbi.
all for staying late.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Night,